Well, thank you so much, Laura, and also Dom Van Zant, who is also fine art faculty at Riverland College. Thank you so much for inviting me to exhibit in the beautiful gallery. In some ways, I'm disappointed to not be in the gallery right now with the exhibit, talking about the work in person and interacting with you face to face. You know, that always brings a really nice energy to the work and to us as people, but the Zoom platform does have the advantage of being able to include people that are in the broader world, right, beyond Austin. So that's really nice. I'm grateful to be here with you all, and I'm particularly excited to be showing the work at Riverland because the title of the exhibit is Visioning Rural Iowa Through the Documentary Tradition, but the photographs are drawn from a 7-year-long documentary project that I worked on about my father's hometown in Belmond, Iowa, which is it's maybe 90 minutes from Austin. It's not far. It's in north central Iowa. So I feel like, you know, just even driving down to Austin from Minnesota, the landscape is really similar, right? So I think there are similarities between, a lot of similarities in the perhaps in the towns and the roles that people play and some of the socioeconomic dynamics that are at work. So Riverland is a great venue for the project. And I hope also that the students in your class, Laura, will have some questions for me. I mean, everybody, of course, is welcome to ask questions, and I hope you do have some, but particularly the students at Riverland have some, or you know, feedback or impressions, things that that struck them about the work. So, because that is super interesting for me to hear. So let's go ahead and get started with my my presentation. What I'm going to talk about today, as Laura mentioned, I want to spend a little bit of time talking first about the Farm Security Administration photographers and about how they, about the tradition of social documentary photography in the United States. And I think you'll see once we get into looking at Uprooted in the slides here that I'm showing that they had a big effect on how I thought about the project. They definitely set a precedence for me in thinking about the work. And so first I'm going to start off showing some work by this Farm Security Administration photographers. I'm going to talk about what that program was, why it was started, and then I'll show some pictures from Uprooted, and I'll talk a little bit about my process, about how I approached the project, how it unfolded, and then, you know, depending on how we are for time. I know we're planning to have about 15 minutes at the end for Q&A. So depending on how long I ramble, I will potentially get in also to talking about things like visual language, which I think, especially, I know Laura is teaching drawing at Riverland, they have painting. So things like visual language, you know, even though photography is a different visual medium, there are a lot of similarities. And indeed, before photography came into being, drawing and painting were the ways that visually that ideas were conveyed, and sculpture too, of course. But you know, I'm a 2D person, so I tend to sometimes, sorry, sculpture people, sometimes I don't always include that in my conversation. So and then, you know, we may get into style a little bit because clearly I made some stylistic decisions, especially with the portraits, in terms of how I set them up and how I lit them. And there was a lot of thought that went into that part of the process. And I think artist talks are, this is why we come to artist talks, so we can learn a little bit about that. So Uprooted is a very meaningful project to me because of the fact that my father grew up in this town in Belmond, and I visited as a child a lot, spent a lot of time on the farm. My grandparents were farmers, and they had what we would refer to as a family farm, 160 acres. When the Homestead Act was first established, it was 160 acres was the plot that farmers got, and that was the size of their farm. So when I think about family farm, this is how I tend to think about things. The project has multiple layers, and I think showing the Farm Security Administration photographs will help add to that dimension. And then also, in a broader sense, the metaphor of uprooted, we're thinking about plants and pulling them out, when we uproot a plant, but also thinking about migration of people and, people moving from one place to another. Why do people move from one place to another? And how does it feel to be without roots? So these are some things that I'm considering when I'm thinking about Uprooted. So I haven't jumped not quite to the FSA pictures yet, but here's another, agriculture, important. So harvest on grandma's farm. Now, in my talk, I want to just discuss a little bit how photography can function as a social document. And a social documentary is a type of photography that records people and their social circumstances, and often the pictures are used in a persuasive way. So, and that is particularly true with the Farm Security Administration photographs. And this also, for me, inspires the ideas about how photography can be used to affect social change. So this photograph is an example from the Farm Security Administration. Young Iowan with horses purchased through a rehabilitation loan, and so there was a program called the Rehabilitation Act, and so they were, this is during the Dust Bowl era. Tenant farmers were, really at a loss and were being relocated from place to place. And so the government had programs to help people, and the government also photographed people that were recipients of the aid that they received. So this is an example, and this one actually is from Iowa, so that's why I included it here. Oops, so when this happens, there we go. Now, this picture is not from the Farm Security Administration. This one is by Louis Hine, and he was a sociologist. He taught in New York City at the university that's now called the New School. And he used photography to document the living conditions of people in tenements in New York City, but then also the labor conditions of children along in New York, but also along the eastern seaboard. So in this particular image, this is in the cotton mill He was photographing the children working. Sometimes children would be as young as 5 or 6. He also photographed a lot in mines, children who are working in coal mines, children in New York City that were, maybe 5 or 6 years old selling newspapers, these types of things. So he took his pictures that he made and presented them to Congress and was able to influence Congress to pass stricter child labor laws. So he, this was before the Farm Security Administration, but it was definitely, and he did not work for the government, but he was definitely influential in the activities of the FSA. So the Farm Security Administration was a US government photography project that was created by President Franklin Roosevelt in 1935. And initially the project documented recipients of cash loans made by the Resettlement Administration. And the Resettlement Administration provided aid to poor rural Americans who were forced off their tenant farms during the Depression and the Dust Bowl years. So I feel like I should talk, just give a little bit of background information about what a tenant farm was or is. This is a situation where there is a landowner, and this is particularly true in the South. There's a landowner, and then the landowner allows people to live on the farm for a portion of the crop, right? So it's also called sharecropping. And during the Great Depression, not only was there, prices were very low, also there was what they call the Dust Bowl years, or a terrible drought. So farmers were not able to make any money, and they consequently weren't able to pay the landowners. So many were forced off their land. And it was an epidemic, right? It was a horrible, it was a crisis. And so Franklin Delano Roosevelt set up the Farm Security Administration in order to provide aid. And then the photographers that worked for the Farm Security Administration were in charge of documenting people who received the aid, but then also living conditions of people who were tenant farmers, who had been forced off their land, who were migrant workers, basically people at the time who were living on the fringes of society. So Roy Stryker, he was the director of the Farm Security Administration, and he was a former student and colleague of Lewis Hine, and also that Roy Stryker was an economist. So he was not a photographer, but he was a director of the FSA. And so this picture, it's hard for me to not talk about style, because in theory, documentary photographs aren't, supposed to have a style. Sometimes people refer to documentary as a style, but, if we're thinking about something as a document, we want to, of course, you have to use your own, always be suspect about what are we being told with our visual image, because photographs are used to persuade, right? But I look at this picture and I immediately think about Grapes of Wrath, both the book and the film. I recently saw the film with Henry Fonda, and I'm sure that the director and the cinematographer spent a lot of time looking at the FSA pictures before they shot it, because this looks like it could be the Joad family, right? Except they were in a truck. So let's move on. So this is the most well-known image from the FSA era. And by the way, the FSA was in existence from 1935 to 1944. So this one is Migrant Mother by Dorothea Lange, and I think it's really interesting, thinking about it from a Western art point of view. It definitely, it's echoing the Madonna archetype and in European art. And so this woman was in a labor camp, actually was sitting in a tent, and it's interesting to know that this picture has been retouched. So in 1936, even in 1936 and before, since the beginning of the inception of photography, photographers have been using different retouching techniques. This is not something that just happened with the advent of Photoshop. So in the original printed negative, you can see there's a hand holding back the flap of the curtain. So I think that's interesting to point out. But this image was reproduced in a San Francisco newspaper and resulted in directed aid to this particular migrant worker camp in Northern California. And Ben Shahn was another FSA photographer, and he was trained as a painter and a printmaker, and he often thought of his pictures as studies for paintings. And I was really drawn to this picture because it reminds me of some of the French social realist painters in the composition and also in the subject matter. So he considered his work as an FSA photographer to be a moral calling, showing the economic conditions of people who were forced to work for little wages. And so this one is from 1935. So Ben Shahn traveled around the South and the Midwest, photographing rural people in the rural areas. And one thing also that I should mention about these photographs that I'm showing you, the Library of Congress, they're all owned by the Library of Congress, and anybody can download. I mean, it's like public domain. These images are in the public domain. So there's an enormous catalog of pictures. It's like all of the pictures that were archived for this project. So it's all online. And I'm really a visual image geek, and also that I'm always connecting in all of my projects, connecting the past to the present. So for me, it's just like a rabbit hole that I could get lost in for hours, looking at all of these pictures. So in case you are interested, you can see them too. They're all out there, Library of Congress. Okay, so these are also Arkansas sharecroppers. And this was photographed for the Resettlement Administration. Now, I wanted to also show some work by Gordon Parks, because he was a pioneer in so many ways. And he was a Farm Security Administration photographer, although he joined later in 1942. And at this time, the FSA was focusing its attentions more on war efforts and also the urban poor. So the focus had shifted away from the plight of the rural farmers. And so Gordon Parks was very, just a little bit of information about him, had a very prolific career. He was born in St. Paul, Minnesota, which is always an interesting fact. And he was a photojournalist. He was the first African-American to work for Life magazine. He was also a fashion photographer, a portrait photographer, and he was a filmmaker. So really had an illustrious career and was incredibly versatile. In this picture, which he also referred to as American Gothic, shows a woman, a cleaning woman for for government buildings in DC, and showing the hidden labor and lives of African Americans. And he was often commissioned by Life to photograph Black families in the South, in addition to the work that he did for the FSA. And Walker Evans, it seems like Walker Evans is one of the best known FSA photographers. He's known for his formalist compositions and for showing unexpected beauty in the everyday. And I got this digital image from the Library of Congress website, and it looks like it's a scan or something, or anyway, it's not a very high quality reproduction of this picture, but also that there are so many different versions of this image. This one also it's not as iconic as the Migrant Mother, but often when we're talking about FSA photographers, and particularly portraits, this picture is shown. And it's interesting to go to the Library of Congress website and see all the different poses or just the subtle changes in her face that in shifts, which as a portrait photographer, this is what we do. But, we know this picture so well, and it's interesting to visit the Library of Congress and see all the variations there are on this particular image. Anyway, this is Allie Mae Burroughs, wife of a cotton sharecropper, and Walker Evans was also known for showing the dignity of his subjects in the face of hardship. So it's a beautiful portrait in that regard. And here is another Walker Evans picture. I really was drawn to this one. This is also from the FSA. He's known for his photographs of vernacular buildings. So country churches like this one, but also things like signage, or shops, exteriors of buildings and shops with the old signs, the old time signs. So he's very often recognized for that. But this one, I am really drawn to things that are old and worn, and also I'm drawn to vernacular architecture. So this one was a great, I thought was a really good segue into my project. So talking about Uprooted a little bit more, and I keep looking at my watch here to see how we're doing for time. Okay, so let's go ahead and shift. So of course in Iowa, there are, when you're driving through the back roads, you see many old little country churches. In Wisconsin too. It seems like in Minnesota, I haven't seen as many. I'm not sure why that is, but little town halls, little country churches, and this reminded me of those. So now we're shifting into my work on Uprooted. And so I was very interested in photographing Belmond because I had been away for 20 years, and I started returning to address some management of farmland. And I really was struck by how many things looked exactly the same how nothing had really changed. But then the more that I learned about agriculture and about the town, the more I learned how much things in fact had changed. So I was really struck by that dichotomy. And all of my photographic projects address connecting the past to the present in some way. So this is that really drew me in. And some of the things that had shifted were immigration, right? Which was very interesting to me because my family are German immigrants, right? And the town was settled in the latter part of the 19th century by German immigrants. So, again, this idea of migration comes into play for me. I was thinking about the current wave of immigrants from Latin America. And I'm thinking about the population shift from rural areas to urban areas for employment reasons. And then also the shifts in agriculture from family farms to more large scale operations. And that these things were all, pretty common knowledge in the mainstream media. But I wanted to maybe get below the surface and also find a connection to some truths that universal truths, I could say. So let's move ahead. I did at the beginning start by looking. I went to the state of Iowa data library to get some demographic information about Wright County. And because, I heard a lot of, I had a lot of anecdotal information, stories that people would tell me that, as I was meeting people, things about like homelessness and poverty, and but also about the number of family farms that are left, and things like racial demographics. So I had a lot of anecdotal information, but I wanted to get a little bit some figures so that I could sort of build my project around that as a way to try to keep it a little bit more based in fact, if that's at all possible, as a guiding, I just call it a guiding force for the project and in making decisions about what to photograph and what not to photograph. And let's see. Also wanting to create a portrait of the town in the 21st century as told through my experiences of the past. And after I had been photographing for probably about a year, I settled on the idea that in order to create a nice, full, well-rounded portrait, that I could photograph all the different roles that exist in the town. So all the different socioeconomic types of jobs, roles, the different roles that people play in town. So I came up with a list and use that to help guide the subjects that I picked. And in my photographic practice, I consider myself a portrait photographer. I gravitate towards photographing people, but when I started working on Uprooted, I was really doing more landscapes and buildings, looking at the just really drawn to the beauty. And, you know, I tell my students all the time that, you know, follow your bliss, right? And that is all about how my projects get started. So when I did not start working on this project with the idea that, oh, I'm going to, you know, make this 7-year documentary and I'm going to call it Uprooted. It just, the projects don't come fully formed. And so it started by landscapes, and actually I'm not really showing any landscapes in my presentation here, but there are many landscapes in the project. But as I kept going back to make more pictures, you know, after landscapes and buildings, I started photographing farmers and agriculture, because that was the part that had changed the most from my perspective. And through that, that was sort of the doorway to get into more about the community and about the people. So let's advance it. Okay. So here are some farmers. One thing that I endeavored to do in photographing my portraits was to make them pretty straightforward, right? I'm trying to avoid the emotional tug or being overly aesthetic with the portraits. And I've had some flack for that, but you know, these are the decisions that we make. The way that the subjects are posed, that they're positioned, the lighting, it's all very intentional. And I'm using the environment that the subjects are positioned in to say something about who they are and what their role is in the town and in life, what they do. And another picture of a farming couple. So I will often use my sequencing in order to make conclusions or comparisons between, or just to, you know, build out the visual language or the dialogue, the narrative that the images are creating. So churches, you know, many churches in the town, and thinking about, so at this point, I have completed the project. I finished it, 2019 was when I felt like I had a well-rounded portrait of the town. And there are, I think, 12 churches. So decisions about how many churches or pastors do I include in the project. The finished body of work is 75 pictures. So, and then Emmanuel Reformed is the church where my grandparents attended. And this is the church, Lutheran church organist. She had been doing it for 50 years. I hear she's no longer in service now, but and this is my cousin, who is an accounting clerk. So you'll notice in the titles, I normally mention what their role is, but you know, sometimes in the titles also, I will make reference to like the family that, you know, I do have a connection that is beyond just, you know, this person that I'm photographing. With the project as well, I was really wanting to get beyond polarizing dialogue. And so that is another reason for posing the subjects in a similar way, right? And having them be similar sizes within the frame, so that I could hopefully level out some of those hot buttons. But also, it's challenging to be making photographs as an outsider because of the power relationship that exists between the photographer and the people that are being photographed, right? So I really try to avoid looking at people as being exotic or different, although you know, as humans, clearly we have differences from one another. So, you know, how can I give agency to my subjects? How can I allow them to, you know, just to, again, try to balance out that power dynamic a little bit, even though I don't think that it's 100% possible, but, you know, having that awareness, I think is really important. Tire mechanic. So Lewis Hine has a really iconic picture of a man working on a big tire, and it's been riffed on by so many photographers. Annie Leibovitz did one with I don't remember who the famous athlete or somebody, you know, she riffed on this Lewis Hine photo. Anyway, you know, we're always being influenced by other artists and other photographers. And I'm thinking, you know, thinking about style, you know, and lighting again, and how can I, you know, avoid, you know, thinking about aesthetics, right? And how can I keep the pictures from being purely about the aesthetics, or that balance between style and subject and meaning. So these are things that I'm also thinking about. You know, I want the pictures to be interesting and to be compelling, but want them to be, you know, I guess a document in that way. Here's waitress. One thing that I have noticed in Belmond is there's a lot of paneling indoors. So going back to, you know, I guess it's a time, right? A time period, a style. You know, it's about my preoccupations too. Honestly, I am really drawn to paneling. Sort of strange, but I have my weird little preoccupation. So yeah, there's a lot of paneling, and I've had criticism also about the project, that saying that the interiors, they don't look very prosperous, or they look old. And yeah, I think that's true. I wonder, you know, these are conversations I have with myself. You know, do I need to be including more prosperity, or images that are showing more prosperity? So, but then here we'll just come to Gary, one of the attorneys in town. No paneling in this picture, but I think there could be, I think there could very easily be paneling here. And also that, this is an interpersonal thing, that, he's really a kind of a smiling and gregarious person. So, and I've tried to photograph people, I didn't want him to smile. If you've noticed, nobody is really smiling in any of the pictures. So, yeah, it's, what does that say about, how would this picture change if you were smiling? These are things that I'm always thinking about. And I see that we're at 1:45, and I just have a couple pictures left on here. So we've got the Paula, the 4th grade teacher. The details are really interesting to me. And this is why seeing photographs as prints, as opposed to seeing them on a computer screen, makes so much difference. Being able to see them in the gallery and see them, see the detail. Although I don't think this one is printed in the gallery. This one's a newer picture, but there's a lot of rich detail here. So you've got an iPad. I was really struck by this, like the emojis, like this is a thing in the classroom. So for me, the prosperity was really shown through people that are at their farms, at their large operations. And this is the grain elevator in town. And that is it for my presentation. And I put my Instagram handle on here too, if you want to follow me. So
great. Thank you so much, Kristin. I have a bunch of questions from my students.
Okay, great. Let's hear it.
And also, I was going to say, if anybody has questions, you can put them in the chat, and then we can get to them. So we visited the show a couple days ago and amassed a bunch of questions. So I'm just kind of pulling what seems to be a representative amount of like, what are kind of the more popular questions. So do you feel like the motivation behind the project was personal, or for you, was it educational?
They're overlapping for me. I'm a very curious person by nature, and anytime I delve into a photo project, it's usually because I want to find out more about something. And that was definitely the case here. So I would say it was both educational and personal, but I got a huge education. I mean, I learned so much about rural communities, about really the fabric of the community and how they support each other. So it was all really a learning experience for me, but then also about agriculture. I learned a ton about agriculture, which, about contemporary agriculture, which I really didn't know much, especially how technology plays such a big role in agriculture today.
Another question we had, what kind of camera do you use?
Yes. So when I started the project, I was using a 4x5 film camera. So a large format. It's like the old fashioned, it takes sheet film that's 4 inches by 5 inches, and you've got the hood that goes over the the back. And some of the earliest pictures were done with that camera. So this one, for example, and also this one. So early on, I was using my 4x5, and I liked that a lot, but it's cost prohibitive. And also there's the piece about turnaround time, and it just wasn't very practical. I had to send my film to Portland, Oregon to be processed, and it was expensive. And so I shifted to digital, and I was using a Nikon D800, so DSLR, and lights, lots of lights.
Kind of tagging along with something you brought up, why do most of the people have serious faces, serious expressions on their face? Was that on purpose? It sounds like it was, but maybe you can expand on that for us.
Yes, I feel like when people smile, we have the whole thing about say cheese, it's about putting on a mask. And I didn't want that. So I felt like people can be more accessible when they have more of a neutral facial expression. So, which I think neutral because America is a very smiley culture. So I think about them as being more neutral, and as opposed to, I don't want them to look angry or to look happy, just sort of like neutral.
Another question we got, how did you get the shot for the firework after the county fair rodeo in 2014? How did you capture it?
Yes, I used a tripod, and with fireworks, you have to take lots and lots of pictures. So, but if your shutter speed is too long, then you won't get much. So it's about experimenting a little bit with different shutter speeds, and taking a lot of photos in order to get a capture that looks good.
What made you want to be a photographer?
I am not very
The
good
big
at drawing.
question. We don't hold back here.
Yeah. I studied visual arts, and I was all about visual communication. But honestly, I am not that skilled at drawing or, conveying things in a realistic way, and which was what I wanted to do. So photography really was a great combination of visual imagery and also a way to tell a story that was more manageable for me. So I'm really interested in storytelling and in narrative and in communication also. And I'm also really interested in the overlap between art and communication, and how sometimes it's one thing and sometimes it's the other, but then sometimes it can be a little bit of both. So those are all of my preoccupations. Also, having a camera is a really great way. It's a little bit like a passport, it's a great way to explore and to investigate. So it's a great way to meet people and to talk to people and to learn, which was how I learned about the town, was because I had to connect with all of these people. I had to, if of course some of the people are family members, but that's just a few of them, right? But I had to make contact. Either they were people that I met on the street, or they were, friend of a friend, or do you know somebody who does this? Or, I would sometimes go into businesses and just ask, explain what I'm up to, and then just ask if I could make some portraits. So it's a really great way to get to know people and to get to know a place. That's a long answer.
Oh, no, that was great.
Yeah.
Sort of, I think in a way dovetailing on that, what emotions do your photographs convey to you? Which of all your pictures that you've taken made a emotional impact on you? Or maybe which, has that comes to mind, had a decisive emotional impact on you?
Ah, yes. That's true. That is no holds barred. Um, that would probably be the ones that are the most personal. And I feel like I should maybe pop over to my website. Oh, I said I was going to queue it up ahead of time and I didn't. Okay. Can you see my website right now?
Not yet.
Okay. All right.
Not
Let me do this. Okay. All right. Here we go. Okay. I am thinking the biggest impact would be, I think it's this one, which is included in the show at Riverland. And the feeling of, it's about socializing, it's about connecting, it's about celebrating. But this picture is really lonely to me, um it's a little bit about being a little bit isolated, but also just about like dancing like nobody's watching, right? Which I love. So, and
Thanks.
there's paneling in it.
I love it. We're paneling. We have two more questions.
Okay.
One is, how did you get such a good, almost eerie yet calm lighting in the New Year's Eve 2013 church parking lot picture?
Ah, yes. Okay. That is right. This one. And I think it's the color, right? And this is the color of, I don't know what type of light this is, but that, so our eyes color correct, right? That's something that our eyes do. Our eyes just automatically have a built-in white balance. So if I were to look at this scene, it would look more white because of the snow. Maybe not totally white, but it wouldn't look this green. So, and then, it's just like a high sensitivity on my shutter, or on my ISO. So it's like turned up really high so that it can be really sensitive and catch all the details in the low light, and then also in the sky, in the back here, which I think also contributes to the eeriness of it. And then also, I'm assuming that this was a technical question, about, and it was so cold out this night. It was below zero and it was windy. And this is a place with windmills. It is windy, right? In Belmond, it is just windy. And it was cold. And I did not have a tripod. I was, it's kind of amazing when things work out. But so it had a faster shutter speed, but just a really, a lot of sensitivity on my ISO in order to catch the subtlety.
Okay, and last question. After 10 years, looking back to these pictures, what do you think you're gonna feel?
10 years from now, looking back? Oh, that is a good question. Even now, because I started going down in 2012. And so that is almost 10 years. But you know, time is always a great way to judge. Time is a good judge, right? I feel like I notice different things when I come back after being away for a while, when I come back to the photographs, um, and I think that's also a strength. The ones that I can come back to and see something different in are ones that are, for me, standing the test of time. And that's true of any artwork, I think, whether it's mine or somebody else's. If I'm able to come back to it and notice something new, or feel a little bit differently about something, that that's really a powerful thing. But you know, I think that's the only answer I have. I'm not sure how, if I will feel, it's hard to know. Will I feel more, probably wonder, you know, like, where are some of these people now? I mean, some of them I know where they are, but some of them I don't. And that, I think, is a big question, you know, where are some of the people now?
Does anybody else have any questions that they want to throw out there? All right. Well, I just want to say just a big thank you from Riverland and from myself for the beautiful show. Like I said, it is open through next Monday, 10 to 6, Monday through Friday, if you want to visit. And you can also see, you can see here, a big selection of the work on the website. So thank you so much, Kristin. Round of applause.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's really been my pleasure. And I wish that I could be down there with you and your class, but another time perhaps.
Okay, thanks everybody for participating. And
yes, and thanks everyone for coming.
And have a great day.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Hey, Mike. Hey, Kristin. So
Hey.
I'm going to stop the recording.
Oh, sure.
Let's see. I think